Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Pacific 4 and 4 episode reviews. I am your host, Mike. Happy Thanksgiving to those of you in the States. Happy Thursday to everyone who's watching. And tonight, I'm going to review the 7th episode of Star Trek Discovery's 3rd season called Unification III. So, why is this episode called Unification 3, you might be asking yourself. And maybe you don't care, but maybe you still want to know why this episode was called Unification 3. Best guess is because there was already a two-part episode called Unification Part 1 and Part 2 during Star Trek The Next Generation's 5th season, which saw Leonard Nimoy reprise his role as Spock on Star Trek The Next Generation to coincide with the release of Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country. Now, in that Next Generation episode, like I said, it aired during the 5th season of Next Generation as a two-parter, and it was dedicated to the memory of Gene Roddenberry, who passed away earlier in that year. In that episode, Spock, who is now an ambassador for the Federation, goes to Romulus to start working on the reunification between the Vulcan people and the Romulan people, because they are distant cousins. The Romulans are a sect of Vulcans who broke away from logic and sought their own way, and they found Romulus eventually, and they found it, like I said, their own way. We all know about Romulan laws, at least what we've been told in previous Star Trek series. We know about Romulus and Remus, and in Unification Part 1 and Part 2, the Federation is none too pleased about Ambassador Spock going to Romulus, thinking that Spock has defected. They send the Enterprise and Captain Picard to Vulcan. Captain Picard has one final scene with Spock's father, Sarek, who is dying, and that would also be the last time we see Sarek. And there's one last mind meld between Picard and Sarek. Picard and Data eventually end up going to Romulus, and they're able to be disguised as Romulans thanks to Dr. Crusher, and get to Romulus via a Klingon bird of prey, because Picard throws his weight around as the arbiter of succession for Chancellor Gowron. And long story short, it was a plot by Sela, who was a sub-commander, and also the daughter of an alternate version of Tasha Yar, who was plotting to have an invasion of the Romulan Empire onto Vulcan on 3 Vulcan ships that wound up being missing from a shipyard and were later discovered to be carrying Romulan troops and were destroyed by a Romulan warbird. So, in that episode, which we actually see part of that scene in Unification Part 3, because that's what I'm going to refer to this episode as from now on, is Unification Part 3, is there's a scene between Picard and Spock where Spock is telling Picard that it could take decades for reunification, it could take years, it could take centuries for reunification, but the seeds for reunification have been laid there on Romulus, and one day the Romulan and Vulcan people will welcome each other as one. Well, as we see by this episode, it does actually end up happening long after Picard's death, long after Spock's death, because this episode picks up and it starts talking about how they still have to find out the cause of the burn, and they have 3 black boxes now, and they're being analyzed. And there's one ship called the Yelchin, which was in tribute to Anton Yelchin, who played Pavel Chekhov in the 2009 reboot Star Trek movies. And I only learned that today, to be honest. Well, according to the 3 black boxes, it was just not even a tenth of a second between the explosion of the Yelchin and 2 other starships during the burn. And there comes up a point where they mention this device that was being developed by the Vulcans and the Federation called S-17, SR-17, something like that. And how information on it is classified. They go to the Admiral. Unfortunately, he's not able to help out, but we do learn in this conversation between Saru, Michael Burnham, and the Admiral that the Vulcans did end up reunifying with the Romulans, and the Vulcans later broke away from the Federation at the behest of the Romulans who were there on Vulcan. So, what ends up happening is Michael Burnham wants to go to Vulcan because she wants to find out more about this SR-17. So, the Admiral pretty much gives them permission to go to Vulcan and says that it's now called Navarre, even though I want to keep calling it Navarre, just like the planet from The Mandalorian, but these are 2 different planets. Although, for the sake of this review, I'm still going to call the planet Vulcan. Just for me. I know it's now called Navarre in this current timeline of Discovery. But for me, I'm still going to call it Vulcan. So anyways, long story short, the Discovery departs Federation headquarters, and it uses the mycelial network to jump to Vulcan. The president of Vulcan is alarmed at their arrival because they didn't show up on long-range sensors, even though the Federation did know to note to the Vulcans that the Discovery was coming. But still, they were alarmed because they were expecting the ship to show up by traditional warp means. And Discovery just jumped in, and they start communicating through the holo communicators. Why it's still so hollow, I don't know. I mean, Discovery has been retrofitted, refitted, whatever you want to call it. And you would think that the holograms would be more solid, like we saw on Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, at least from a holodeck standpoint. You would think that by the 31st century, holo emitters would be able to emit a solid hologram. I know it wouldn't be a hologram if it's solid, but in this case, let's just go with it and say that technology has advanced so far that you can't tell a hologram from a regular person. Whether they're back at Federation headquarters or communicating to Discovery like we saw the Vulcan president. Well, she's alarmed at Discovery's arrival, and Saru explains that they have the spore drive, that they're able to jump from point to point, and they have new evidence concerning the burn. And they wish to, gain more information on SR-17. Well, they're denied this information of SR-17 until Michael Burnham invokes Jot-Jalat, or some Vulcan ritual of logic where she can basically say, I have these facts. I have to prove that these facts are logical and sound, and I wish to have hearing. In short, that's pretty much what she said. So the hearing is granted on discovery, and we meet some of the delegates. And one of the delegates that we end up meeting is Michael Burnham's mother. She is reunited with her mother. So it's a mother and daughter reunion because her mother, it turns out, is going to be her advocate. And in the meantime, back in engineering, Saru is talking to Tilly, and he mentions the fact that he is looking for a new first officer, and he has chosen Tilly, who has barely gotten through the command program, to become his first officer. A first officer who, mind you, is an ensign. So, I don't know how I would feel if I was a higher ranking officer and Saru is looking at an ensign who hasn't even been through a command training program and has considered her for the position of first officer. I don't have any problem with it being a woman. I just have a problem with the fact that it's a lower ranking officer getting the position of first officer when it should be someone who has a little bit more experience. And in order to gain more experience in the command program, just like Deanna Troi had to, it should be someone who's, lieutenant commander, lieutenant, someone who has the aspiration or drive or is even encouraged in this case. Yes, Tilly was encouraged in this case to take the first officer position. But even Deanna Troi had to go through the training program on Next Generation and, make the tough decisions, because there was a scene in Next Generation when Deanna was going through the command training program, and she had to make tough choice of sending the holographic version of Geordi into what would be his uncertain death in order to repair damage to some plasma coils. So until Deanna did that, she wasn't able to pass the training program and become commander. And Riker, at the end of it, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't remember the exact line, but Riker says to her, sometimes we have to make the tough decisions. We have lives that we're responsible for as someone who's in command, and sometimes we have to make those tough choices and send somebody to what we know is going to be their uncertain death in order to accomplish a mission, or in this case, save the ship. So anyways, the trial begins, and Michael Burnham starts stating her case, and of course there are some doubters. There is a Romulan there who points out that Michael Burnham should be listened to, and also the fact, like I said before, the Romulans, once Romulans and Vulcans reunited, well, it was the Romulans who didn't want to break away from the Federation, and we find out the reason why the Romulans didn't want to break away from the Federation is because the Federation was willing to work on this new technology because they were running out of dilithium. And another thing about this episode, and again, if you're new to these reviews, I skip points. I don't give the whole plot-by-plot detail of what happened in the episode. I skip points. I go back to points because I want somebody who's watching this to be able to go back and watch an episode of Discovery, watch an episode of The Mandalorian for themselves. And, even if I don't bring up a point, maybe they see something that I didn't see or I didn't mention, and go, all right, okay. So, anyways, we come to learn that the reason why Vulcan separated from the Federation 100 years ago was because the Vulcans were no longer willing to work on this SR-17 technology Yet the Romulans, who were now on Vulcan, wanted to stay with the Federation and keep working on this new technology that was an alternative to not only dilithium but also warp drive. Which, when I saw the schematic, I was thinking to myself, Next Generation had an episode where this species was able to create these wave fronts which would propel the ship to warp. And of course, it turned out to be a disaster because they didn't know how to slow a ship down once it was caught up in this wave. And you would think in 900 plus years, maybe that technology would have been looked at again, and maybe all the kinks would have been worked out. But hey, that's just me. But anyways, we find out that there's still friction on Vulcan between different sects. On Vulcan, the Romulan sects. We also, have the Jod Utad, or whatever it was called, on Star Trek Picard. And, those Romulans are part of this new Vulcan, Navarre. And I tell you, watching this episode, it just made me wonder. Now, why wouldn't one of the founding members of the Federation try to continue to work things out, even try to come up with something as an alternative to this SR-17 device? But I don't know. I don't write for the show, and another thing in this show that we get is crying time. There's always a lot of tears shed. There were tears shed between Tilly and Michael, Michael and her mother, and Michael and Saru. And, in this episode, the whole gist of it was to get this information to find out the cause of the burn. Michael goes to this trial, and then she pulls herself from the trial because her own advocate, her own mother, will call her out and tell her that she's selfish and is only doing this for herself. And in a lot of ways, she is doing this for herself. But, Michael's doing this to get the information from the Vulcans on this device so she can find out the cause of the burn. And she could be declared, the person who solved the mystery. I mean, that's just how I'm interpreting the story. I know there are those of you out there who probably interpret it very differently than I do. You probably enjoy this series a lot more than I do, and I understand that. Believe me, I do. But, there's still things about this show that I don't like. To say that Spock just ran away and gave up, well, because that is one of the things that they say in this episode. Not directly, it was more indirectly. But, to say that Spock just gave up and ran away. Now, if they're referring to Spock's actions in the 2009 movie, Spock didn't give up. Spock still went out and that Vulcan shuttle, Vulcan ship that he had, and tried to close the anomaly that caused the Hobus supernova in that movie. So, Spock, I would think, yeah, okay, he failed at stopping the star from exploding. Yes, Romulus was lost, but he still tried to save as many systems in the Romulan system that he could. And another message I seem to be, hearing about this episode is that without Michael Burnham, Spock wouldn't be who he was. Well, I'm sorry, before Discovery, we already knew what kind of officer, what kind of person that Spock was. And whether it was influence from Michael Burnham, influence from Sarek, influence from Sybok even. I mean, nobody ever mentioned Sybok, but, Spock would make his own path. And yes, he would have people who would influence him on that path. But I don't think it would be just one particular person that would do that. I think, as much as they argued back and forth and disagreed, that there would be some influence from Sarek, there would be some influence from Sybok, especially after what happened in Star Trek V. And, influence from Michael Burnham, but also influence from Spock's own mother, Amanda. So, to say that Spock wouldn't be Spock without Michael Burnham, I'm not sure about that. You could say Spock wouldn't be Spock without Amanda, without Sarek, without Sybok, without anyone who we encountered. Heck, Dr. McCoy. Those two went back and forth quite a bit in the original series. So that could have been an influence. After all, the last time we see Dr. McCoy, as far as Trek canon is concerned, is Encounter at Farpoint near the end of Part 1, and Admiral McCoy is talking to Data. So even then, Spock and McCoy could have still had, a back and forth. But, it would have been out of mutual respect, mutual friendship. But, anyways, Michael Burnham does end up getting the data that she needs on the SR-17. Tilly does accept her promotion, at least a field promotion, to first officer. And, of course, Stamets did mention earlier in the episode, he said it would be kind of weird to take orders from an Tilly because she is an ensign, so that does bring back to my previous point. But all in all, this episode, it was okay. I'm going to admit that my favorite part of this episode was seeing Leonard Nimoy on screen. Yes, it was the clip near the end of Unification Part 2 before Spock mind melds with Picard. But it was that particular clip near the end where Spock's telling Captain Picard that it could take, years, decades, centuries for the Vulcans and Romulans to reunite. So that was nice to see. And, there are going to be some people that may not agree with me that was nice to see, but it was nice to see Spock. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to give it some fancy nickname. Spock. It was nice to see Spock. Not someone else playing Spock like we've seen previously. It was nice to see Leonard Nimoy's Spock. Even if it was a clip from a Next Generation episode, it was still nice to see. I'm always going to be a fan of Spock, and my preference will always be Leonard Nimoy's Spock because Leonard Nimoy was that character. And this was, another crying episode, like I said, of Star Trek Discovery. And, like I said last week, the show is what it is. I really don't know what else to say about it anymore. Other than the fact that it is what it is, I've grown to accept it to a certain point that it's never going to change. It's never going to be like the Star Trek that I once knew, the Star Trek that I had seen previously. Even though the Vulcan president and Saru did have a few Star Trek-esque moments in this episode, this show is never going to be Star Trek itself. It's going to be its own version. It's going to go by its own rules. It's not going to go by a previously established canon. Not to say that every series went by previously established canon. I mean, look at Enterprise. Enterprise made a few canon violations. Phase pistols, when we knew from at least Cage that the Federation and Starfleet officers still used laser guns. So that's just one of many that I go on about, but I'm just going to try to keep this review short compared to my other reviews that I've done. But, Discovery is what it is. It's never going to change. And I'm just going to keep going through the rest of the season knowing that fact. And I don't know if I'm going to review next season, since next season's already in pre-production. But I do know that hopefully, maybe, depends on what happens with, everything that's currently going on with the pandemic, that the Orville has resumed filming, because I have seen several articles stating the fact. I've watched several shows that are stating the fact. I've watched several YouTube videos that are stating the fact. Whether it comes from a non-Phantom Menace member or a Phantom Menace member. That's right, I watched the Phantom Menace. And I know it's probably lost some viewers right now just saying that, but sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't. I've got nothing against them because they're just stating rumor. They're also just giving their points of view, their opinions. And everyone's got an opinion. So, you may agree with it, you may disagree with it. Like I've said before, you may agree with my opinion, you may disagree with my opinion, but, just because I watch the Phantom Menace doesn't mean I agree with everything they say. Heck, there are even some videos about the Phantom Menace that I could start watching, and then I turn it off because I go, nah, this is too ridiculous. But I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. I'm not going to, bash them, because I'm a fan of some of those guys and gals. And, they do make some valid points, but I try to make sure that if I'm going to do my review, that I haven't seen too many other reviews on Star Trek Discovery, because I don't want to sway my opinion. And I'll even try to give an episode, another watch, just to, formulate my final opinion on an episode. And like I've said before, I could be watching the episode even one time, and then maybe weeks, months, years later, watch it again and have a completely different opinion than I did when I first watched it. But, like I said, and this is going to be my final review on the episode. It was another cry episode. It's another episode where there was tension, there was unrest on the planet. Nobody's at peace. Everybody is at, just at each other, and it just doesn't make logical sense to me that a species that is logical like the Vulcans would, permit so much unrest. You invite somebody to your home, somebody's living at your home, well, they have to know the ground rules. Yes, unification is about coming together, putting aside each and everyone's differences, which is what we all should be doing now. But I don't see that happening either. But when you hear that there's unrest because there are different belief systems, well, of course there are. Not everybody believes the same thing. You and I probably don't believe the same thing. But I can at least accept and respect your opinion, and hopefully, maybe, I don't know, maybe not, you can, be accepting of mine and respectful. I mean, that's really what it comes down to anymore. It's just be respectful. And I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up right there. So, if you liked what you saw here tonight, thank you very much. Give this video a thumbs up. Share it if you like. But I'd also be, shorting myself if I didn't ask that you follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at those addresses you see on your screen. Unfortunately, there will, at least at this point, not be any links in the video description for the social media. That's why I say go to the About page on the YouTube channel, or if you're watching on Twitch, go to the About page on the Twitch channel and click on the links there. And I hope you all liked what you heard tonight. If you didn't, that's fine. But if you did, thank you very much. Really appreciate anybody who watches this live, anybody who watches this after the fact, and just really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me go on, ramble, go off topic even, and do this on a day-to-day basis, or in this case with Discovery and The Mandalorian on a Thursday and Friday basis. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a good rest of your evening. I will see you all later. And, well, of course I'll see you all later. And I will see you tomorrow at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. That's 7 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of Pacific 4 and 4 episode review. And it's going to be Chapter 13 of The Mandalorian. I don't know if the title is true, but I've read and I've heard, and I will find out tomorrow whether or not this episode is called The Jedi. Because right now, that's the rumor of what the episode's called. And if it's The Jedi, then it's going to be a certain Padawan showing up. Hopefully. So, this has been Mike for Pacific 4 and 4 episode review. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all later.